Well, hi everyone. This is Sheldon Anderson from Miami University. Obviously, I'm not at the university right now, my home office, but nice to see you all. Um, my presentation is about my memoir, which I finished last year. I'm not plugging it, but if you want to pick up a copy, University of Nebraska Press. It's called Jump Shooting to a Higher Degree. My basketball odyssey. That picture is from when I played in West Germany for 4 years. It's a national player that was on the Bayer Leverkusen. That photo is a nice one, but I discovered this photo shortly after the book was coming out, and I really wish I would have had this one because this one really kind of captures the zeitgeist. That's about 5 seconds after my last game in college. I mean, take a look at that hair. It's hideous. The shorts. So it really kind of captures what basketball was like at that time. And I played basketball in Minneapolis, in inner city Minneapolis. This little orb took me then to Europe after college. Played 4 years in West Germany and a year in communist Poland. When you write a memoir, you wonder if people are really going to want to read it. Is the story worth telling? And I think it is because, especially the last part of it, because I think I'm probably the only guy that got a PhD or his research on his PhD done in behind the Iron Curtain, in this case in communist Poland. So the little rock, as people call it, got me to a lot of different places. And the story is not really about basketball. It's more about the people I met, the places I visited, and the many, many friends that I got there. So it's really a reflection on the Cold War, on West Germany, and on Poland, as well as some of my stories from Minneapolis. The woman, when I was playing basketball in West Germany, I met a woman from East Germany, from Magdeburg, and she became a dear friend of mine. She was my mother's age when I met her, probably in her mid-70s. And it's really a fascinating contrast between her mother and my mother and their lives. My mother lived through the Depression. My father did not fight in World War II. Of course, that was the other momentous event, I think, in their lives, the Second World War. But my father was a Lutheran minister, so he didn't go to fight in Germany or in the Pacific. But the Depression had a significant impact on their lives. I would say that was the thing that impressed them the most. But then comparing it with Mrs. Detzer, this woman I met from East Germany, comparing her life with my mom's. They were both born in 1916. My mother's mother, my grandmother, died in the flu epidemic after World War I. But Mrs. Detzer grew up then as an infant in the Kaiserreich before that fell apart at the end of World War I. She lived under the Weimar Republic until 1933. Then she lived for 12 years under the Hitler regime. She then, after World War II, because of the lines that were drawn, and this is interesting, I think the way diplomatic history can impact, that's my little buddy insisted in sitting up here. The lines that were drawn by the Allies, impacted people's lives. I teach diplomatic history, and I think it's still an important field, although it's kind of been marginalized a little bit in history departments, in the sense that those decisions made at Tehran and then Yalta, Potsdam, about where the lines of demarcation were in terms of the occupation zones in Germany. The American soldiers, Mrs. Detzer saw American soldiers in Magdeburg. They liberated Magdeburg from the Nazis. But that was part of the Soviet zone. So the Americans moved out, and here come the Soviets into Magdeburg, her town, which is about 30 miles inside of what was then East Germany after the war by 1949. So, in other words, the decisions made had impacted their lives in a great way. She ended up in a communist country for 40 years. Anyway, I got to meet her. I met her kids, her son and daughter. Spent many holidays there, and really was fascinated by the Iron Curtain, going through Checkpoint Charlie into East Berlin. Her son lived in East Berlin many times, visiting her in Magdeburg. She actually phonied up a visa for me to get in there, um, that I was some long lost relative. I mean, that put her on the line a little bit. I'm sure there's a Stasi um, uh, file on her, a secret police file on her, probably one on me. It's something I'd like to explore someday. But she went out on a limb to try to get me a visa to go in there, to visit her and her son and daughter. Anyway, fast forward, after playing in high school, after playing in college, I went to West Germany and played there for 4 years in 3 different cities, and then went back to Minnesota to do a PhD in East European history. And in 1988, I needed to do research for my dissertation. The premise of my dissertation, in 25 words or less, is that Poland, even though it was a communist country, was willing to cooperate with Western Europe economically. That it wasn't that the Soviet Union was pulling everything out of Poland, that a dollar to Poland did not necessarily mean it went directly to Russia. And Poland's exports of coal to Western Europe was really a vital part of the success of the Marshall Plan. Anyway, it was trying to break down this idea that there was a monolith in Eastern Europe, that all those countries were the same, that that it was Stalinist, and that was really not the case. There were a lot of differentiations. So I was going to do research in Poland on this. By the way, my second book on East Germany and Polish relations, East German-Polish relations, has to do with this, the difference between these two countries. I always felt when I took the train from West Germany to East Germany to Poland, I was going from a free country to a police state, East Germany, to a free state, Poland, even though it was communist and in the Warsaw Pact. So there was great differences, and I outlined that in my second book on East German-Polish relations after the war. But anyway, I couldn't get into Poland. I tried to get into the archives there because I was doing somewhat sensitive stuff on Communist Party policy after World War II. And I tried to get a Fulbright. That failed, and I thought it was because my language wasn't very good. I took a couple of years in Polish at the University of Minnesota, but I was by no means fluent. I could read it pretty well. And so I thought that was the reason I didn't get it, was that the Fulbright people thought the Poles would not let me into the archives. Well, actually, I got a connection to play basketball in Poland, and that's how I got into Poland to do my research. And through some finagling, they always say, a little vodka here, a little vodka there, and you can get anything in Poland. And that was the case, and I got into the archives. I met a woman from the embassy, the U.S. Embassy in Warsaw, the cultural attaché, at a party once. I didn't spend a lot of time with the Americans in Warsaw, but I happened to get invited to this party. They knew I was in Poland. It was unusual that an American was coming to Poland to play basketball, obviously. And she said to me at this party, this cultural attaché, said, "I remember you, Sheldon. I was on that Fulbright committee, and we thought you wouldn't be able to get into the archives." I thought it was because my Polish was so bad, because I had an interview with the Fulbright people, and they did a kind of a language test. But she said, no, it was actually that we didn't think you'd get into the archives. And I said, well, in fact, I'm in. That was a very lucky thing, I think. Okay, a Fulbright looks good on your resume for getting jobs and so on. But it was a fantastic experience to play throughout Poland, different cities, getting to know non-academics. I just lived a normal life there, really the way Poles lived. I didn't make any money for this club. They gave me a place to stay, some food, not much. And that was all I had. I brought in $700 in cash into Poland, and I lived better than Poles because the average salary was $30 a month. So it wasn't a hardship for me, but it was such a fantastic experience to to go to Poland. But I think the thing that's interesting about this, and I'd like to highlight, is that there were so many differences between these two communist countries, East Germany and Poland. Um, that I think we really need to break down this image of the Soviet monolith, or the communist monolith. That there were so many differences, and of course we know that the Soviets and the Red Chinese, they were ready to go to war with each other in the late 70s. I mean, this idea of the communist solidarity was fantasy. The Sino-Soviet split was significant. And the Poles and the East Germans had no love for each other. The East Germans still had prejudices about Poles. All right, they're communists. They're supposed to be, this brotherhood, sisterhood of communism in Eastern Europe. Well, that was really not the case either. They were nationalists first, chauvinists in many ways. But the East Germans had utter disdain for the Poles and the way they ran their economy. The East Germans were very proud of running the best socialist economy. They couldn't say that because they had to pay homage to the big brother Soviet Union, but they were very proud of that, and they always used this slur. The Poles, they run a Polish economy. That's what they do. They can't get their act together. So there was that. In the Poles, I just felt like I could say anything I wanted in Poland. It was, kind of a free country. They didn't care. There was one higher up in the Polish communist government in the late 80s. I was there 87, 88, a year before the fall of the wall, and he said cynically, this is a Polish communist apparatchik, he said, we have the power and you don't. They didn't believe in it. The East Germans really did. There were a lot of East Germans that did, that thought they were really running a great system. And one of the things that you could do in East Germany, or you could do in Poland, I'm sorry, that was frowned upon in East Germany, was exchange money. You had to be careful a little bit in East Germany about where you changed money. On the black market I'm talking about, because what you got in the bank was far below what you could get on the street in exchange for a West German mark or a dollar. So all the dollars I brought into Poland, I kept to myself and traded on the street for zloty. But in East Germany, I had to be a little more careful about that. In Poland, everybody was asking. Government officials were asking me to change money. So there was just a feeling of freedom in Poland. They really didn't take their government seriously. It was as though they just shrugged and said, well, this is the way it ended up after World War II. We've got no choice. This is our fate. History is unjust. It certainly was in the case of Poland. So that's a lot of what I write about in the book, that it's a reflection on the Cold War. It's a reflection on Poland, about East Germany, these friends, the people I lived with. The guy I lived with in Warsaw, interesting guy, he made sales on sewing machines. He had people coming into his apartment, his big apartment, making sales for sale to West Germany. Now that kind of stuff was frowned upon in East Germany. But this was a quasi-private enterprise in Poland. Of course, all of the farming in Poland remained private, unlike East Germany, which was all collectivized. So there was so much of this kind of different aspects of the Polish economy. And this guy, he made sales on the side, on the private sailmaker. He also had a kind of a small yacht in Danzig, or Gdansk in Polish. Sorry about using the word Danzig. That was the German for it, of course. But he could sail to Norway, so it was a lot easier for the Poles to travel as well. So the long and the short of it, this book is really about the people, the places, the experiences. It's not necessarily about this thing and how many points I scored. It's really about the memories I have of this, and so it was really a fun project for me to do. but I think there's a lot of worthwhile behind the scenes insight into what was going on in the Soviet bloc and in West Germany in the 1970s. So thank you, and I look forward to some commentary.